Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys a quick update on my front garden here in late spring, show you some of the spring flowers that are still going, and I'm also going to be planting up the front garden with some summer bedding plants to ensure that the colour continues throughout the rest of the summer. So I'll start off in this front section over here. This is the section where I normally have lots of pots and planters. I haven't planted up many of them this year. I have got a lot of tuberous begonias which I'm growing on in my parents' polytunnel, and I'm hoping to bring them and fill some more of this area later in the summer. But for now it's just what I've got left over from basically the winter. So I've got this trough down here. This I'll probably plant up with some tuberous begonias later in the season. At the moment it's a bit weedy, although this weed's got nice flowers, so I've kind of left that one. Up here we've got my Fuchsia plant, which I've been pruning into an interesting shape. This year I'm going to make a video about it as I'm going to change the shape slightly. And as you can see, it's starting to green up really nicely at the moment and it's looking quite good. Then over here we got the whiskey barrels. Now these were actually planted up with bamboo very recently, and I've only just taken out the bamboo yesterday and repotted them into larger pots. Basically I had the bamboo in the original pot, not planted into the soil, just buried in the original pot so that it would contain the roots, and so I could easily take them out and swap them out with a new plant for the rest of the season. So I'll quickly show you the bamboo and show you how they're doing. So you'll have to excuse the mess as I'm currently building a shed in the back garden, but these are the two bamboo plants that were in the front. So they were actually in much smaller pots. I think these pots are about 10 litres, but they were in 2-litre pots before this, sitting inside the barrels. So this is the small one, and they're both grown from seed. They're about 4 or 5 years old now. This one tends to be nice and short, really dense with loads and loads of bamboo canes, but very thin canes. That's got that nice light green, kind of lime green foliage. This one over here grows slightly differently, even though the seeds were collected at the same time. This one has much fewer canes, although it's still very dense with canes. Canes are a bit bigger, and the canes tend to branch quite a bit as well. The foliage is darker, and the canes go a nice kind of dark red, almost black colour. So they're looking quite nice. I'm going to grow them all a bit bigger this year in these pots and then decide where to plant them eventually. But these are clumping bamboos. I think they're Fuchsia species, so they stay nice and compact, and so I don't have to worry too much about them running anywhere, so I wouldn't need any bamboo barrier or anything like that for them. So those two bamboo plants, as they were in the middle of these planters, and they were just given a bit of greenery over the winter, because in winter time here in Scotland everything's pretty much dormant. There's nothing really in green apart from this Cordyline here, so it's just to add a bit of colour and greenery to the garden. So what we've also got here is I've got a few other plants with some nice silvery foliage, some violas and some wallflowers. The wallflowers were looking fantastic. I'll show you some photos I actually took of this one. It was looking really nice, but as you can see they're just starting to go over. So with this wallflower and all the other wallflowers in the garden, what I'll be doing is I'll be keeping them because I'd like to grow them again next year. And although most people grow them as annuals and they just grow them 1 year and they throw them away, if you cut them back hard, let them grow over summer, they will flower again next year and they'll be even bigger and better. They are short-lived perennials though, so you can probably only get 3 or 4 or 5 years out of them. Eventually they get a bit woody and leggy and they just kind of go over. So with all of these, I'll cut them back hard, but where I cut them back to, I'll make sure there's some leaves, because if you cut them back too hard, they don't resprout very well. So I'll cut them back as hard as they can without killing them. They should resprout over the summer, be nice bushy plants by autumn, and then next spring they'll be flowering again. And so with this planter, what I'll probably do is I'll cut back these silvery plants, because what's going to happen with these is they're going to go to flower soon. They have nice yellow flowers, but they're not really in keeping with my summer theme, and when they go to flower it does weaken the plant. So I'll cut these back hard, they'll bush up, but I'll keep them in here for next summer. So I'll just be planting around them. And what I'm going to put in here is petunias. Because this is a really sunny hot spot, they should do really well here. I don't normally grow a lot of petunias in Scotland because the climate's a little bit cold, and it's got a really sunny position. They don't do as well as other plants such as Lobelia and violas and Pansys, but it should do okay in this position because we've got this white render wall. It's south-facing, gets loads of heat and light reflected off the wall, and it's a real sun trap with the concrete around here as well. So the petunias should do really well in this position. So they'll be trailing down over the edge of the pot. The violas will be taken out, and it should look quite nice, I think. And then we've got the red Abyssinian banana here, or the Ensete ventricosum Maurelli. I've got one there. I've also propagated one for the other one, which I'll show you in a sec. And we've got a nice rose here that came with the garden. That'll be flowering soon. You can see it's already got plenty of buds on the top. I've also got a giant castor oil plant down here. This one is the Zanzibarensis variety, so it's got slightly larger leaves than the normal one, and it's got a little bit of a blue tinge to them when they get a bit more mature, so it'll be interesting to see how that looks. I grew a purple variety here last year and it got really big, covered up this whole area, so that one should even do better this year because it's a larger variety. And then this is the other barrel. Again, I've taken out the bamboo. It had a pretty similar planting of winter bedding, but you can see the growth difference. That one is a lot smaller than the one over this side. That's because although in summer they get similar amounts of light, in winter there's a huge difference. This one over here gets a lot of light, but in winter we have very low light here in Scotland. So this hedge, although it's not very high and it's quite far away from the planter, it actually casts an awful lot of shade. So in midday this was getting no sun, and so this was a lot more sheltered, because although this is a south facing wall, it's more southeast facing, so it does get a bit of shade from that hedge in midday in winter time. But as you can see, it still looks okay. The violas have pretty much finished, so they've gone over, and I managed to get a small offshoot from my Ensete plant, so this is going to be another Ensete Maurelli. It's just a very young plant though, so that'll take a little while to get established. So that's the barrels anyway, and as I say, I will be planting up with more flowers around here with planters. So I'll take you now to the curved bed around here. This is kind of like mainly lilies that I plant here and a few sunflowers. So I was hoping to have a lot more sunflowers, but unfortunately I was just a bit late this year, and the ones that I did grow, both of them got destroyed by slugs and snails. So this one here, this is one of the ones that survived the second dose of slugs. So I'll show you some pictures of how this plant and its brothers and sisters looked about a week or two ago when it was absolutely devastated by slugs. And I did plant a lot of seeds in here. I think it must have been a bad batch of seeds because they never came up. I do have a third batch of sunflowers growing now, but they're really far behind, so I won't be getting any giant sunflowers this year, or at least not as big as I could potentially get. But I'm still hoping for decent sized plants by the end of the season. So I've also planted one in the far corner there, but they never do as well there. Because of the hedge over there, it sucks out a lot of moisture from the soil. It's always a bit drier and less nutrients, so the sunflowers never do as well in that position. So in the semicircular bed here, as I said, I have loads of lilies. They've done much better this year than they did last year. I was a bit worried because at first what came up was this one lily here from this section, and I thought they're going to be a lot smaller than last year's, and then suddenly this one came up, and you can actually see here, this is how thick the stem was last year. There were tree lilies, but because the bulbs weren't that big, and it was the first year that I've put them in my garden, they didn't actually grow particularly large, and they were just really small. They just looked like normal sized lilies. But this year, as you can see, the stem is so much thicker than last year's stem. You can see at that point there, much thicker stem, so I'm expecting much taller plants, and they're already about as tall as they were at the maximum height last year, so it's looking really good. But I will have to look out for lily beetle. Lily beetle is a really big problem. These bright orange beetles, they lay their eggs on the leaves. You can actually see some down here at the moment. They're normally under the leaf, so they're harder to see, but this one's actually laid it on the top, on the surface. So I'll need to crush all those eggs before they hatch. The larvae are devastating for anything in the lily family. They'll basically just strip all the leaves and the plant will become really stunted, so I need to regularly look out for them. And unfortunately there doesn't seem to be any native animals that really eat the lily beetles, so it does become pretty bad. So I've got 5 different varieties here, 3 of each. So these are the 3 here. These actually came up as a really red purple colour, but they've gone green again. And there was the 3rd one here. For some reason the growing tips has been damaged on this, so that probably won't flower this year. And as it doesn't have as many leaves, it'll struggle a bit next year. So that's a bit of a shame, but otherwise these 2 are doing quite well. Then on the far side, you can really see a big difference in the varieties of how well they've grown. These 3 here aren't too dissimilar to the size they were last year, although I think they're still going to get taller because we've still got quite a bit more of the grow season to go. Same with these 3 here. But this variety, for some reason, has absolutely loved this position and has grown so much better than last year. They were all a similar height last year, about 1 foot in height, but this one is already, I would say, depending if you straighten or not, because they are curved over, it's about 3 foot in height or a metre at the moment. So they're really large plants, and these eventually can get to 2 or 3 metres in height when they're fully established large plants. So that'll be great to see one year when they get to their full size. So I'll show you the stems again, so how much bigger they are. These are the stems from last year. As you can see, they're so much thicker this year, so much healthier. That one again, you can see that's the old stem going that way. That's the new stem next to it, much thicker, much stronger plant. So we're going to get a much larger flowering display this year. And then we've got 3 more on this corner, again a slightly different variety, and just not doing quite as well as the others. But I've managed to be quite vigilant this year with lily beetle. There's only been minor damage, and the damage that we have had has actually been from slugs and snails. It's not from lily beetle. Lily beetle damage looks a little bit different to this. The younger larvae, when they first come out, what they actually do is they just nibble the very underneath of the leaf, and they don't go right through, so you get this kind of like see-through appearance on the leaf. And then eventually when the beetle larva does get larger, then you do get the whole lot nibbled off and destroyed. But that's looking quite good at the moment. So the lily display, I'm thinking, is going to look really good late summer, but it's late spring at the moment, so no flowers yet. But I do have a spring flowering plant here which is just going over. This is Honesty, so I didn't actually plant this. It's so self-seeded. I recognised it last year, so I left it in the ground. Honesty is a biannual plant, so the first year it just grows loads of leaves, the second year it flowers, and then you have the nice seed heads. So I left this in the garden because I knew it would look nice this year. It just clumped up last summer, had a nice group of leaves, and then this spring it really exploded into growth. I'll show you some photos as well, because this was flowering really nicely just a few weeks ago. You can see there are a few flowers left, but it's just about finished now. It's really finished its flowering. It is an early spring flowering plant, but the added bonus with this is once it goes over, you get these nice big seed pods that get really quite large, and they're flat. And once the seeds peel off and the outer layer peels off, you've got this really nice silvery colour, and it just looks really nice in the winter time. So I'll be keeping this all summer and all into winter, as long as the storms don't blow it over, and that'll just give a bit of winter interest. And then there's a couple of other plants to note in this garden. So last year I wanted to grow loads of ornamental cabbage to try and make it look really nice over winter, a bit of colour and greenery. I didn't have many seeds, unfortunately, so I just planted some red kale, which was nice to have a bit of colour over winter. But what I really like about it is you get these beautiful flowers in spring. It's great for the pollinators, and you get this nice display. Now these are just about finished, but last year when I had a lot more kale plants, it looked really nice, and I'll show you some pictures now of these bright yellow flowers, and they do look particularly good. So kale plants are probably my favourite winter and spring bedding plant. It's a bit unusual. They do have that really nice bright colour over winter, and then that flowering in spring. I did have a couple of plants that were the ornamental variety, which are these ones here. You can see some of that bright pink, but they have mostly gone over, so they've lost that colour, and also the flowers are finished as well. So I think I'll be taking some of these out later this week. And then the last plant that we have in this curved bed here, the Gladioli. So these Gladioli actually came free with an order of bulbs I did last year. And normally Gladioli, what you do in Scotland is you dig them up and you just bin them every year, and you get new ones because they don't normally do very well in our climate. They will flower great and grow really well in our summer, but then they don't normally seem to store enough energy for the next year for a good flowering display. So every year they get worse and worse, and so normally you just get 1 or 2 good years from them. But what I noticed with this variety last year is it kept its leaves unusually long. Normally when I've grown Gladioli in the past, they tend to lose their leaves not long after flowering. Around about September, October time, they lost all the leaves and they die back. But these were really late. Until we had some particularly hard frost, they still had the leaves nice and green right into November, early December time. So I think these actually collect a lot of energy and have stored up some good tubers underground. So what I'm expecting is these to actually do okay this year. So I'm going to just leave them, let them grow, see what kind of flowering I get. You can see they've got decent strong growth coming through at the moment. You can see that's the old stem just down there, how it looked last year. You can see the kind of thickness of the stem. They won't form the thick stems until they come into their flowering time, which is normally about 2 months after you've planted them. So I'll see how they do. I'm kind of hopeful to see what happens. I think they will actually do okay, even though I don't normally grow Gladioli year after year in Scotland. I think because these kept their leaves for so long last year, I think there's a good chance these will do well. And then we also have a few self-seeded violas. I always plant a lot of violas in my garden for spring and winter interest, and they just tend to self-seed, and when they do self-seed I normally just leave them, so we get a nice kind of mixture, and they all kind of hybridize and crossbreed. So I think the variety I planted last year was this one here. I think it's called Coconut Duet. It's one of my favourite varieties. You get that really nice dark purple with that creamy white and then that nice yellow centre. It's probably my favourite viola variety, but it tends to cross-pollinate with other ones, and then you get all these interesting different colours coming up, and loads of different varieties, so that's always nice to see. And you'll probably see around the beds I've got a few different self-seeded ones just kind of popping up. So what I'll talk about now is the main beds at the front here. So this bit on the side, I've not fully decided what's happening with that, so that's still kind of like a wilderness kind of area. It's just long grass at the moment. It looks surprisingly nice with all the dandelions in spring though, loads of nice yellow flowers, but I'll be cutting that back soon, and I need to make a decision on what I'm going to do with that strip. It might be a nice bit of lawn, or it might be something else. I'm not too sure. It does get plenty of sunlight in the summertime, but it's very dry where you get the roots from the hedge coming through, and in winter time it gets full shade because as soon as the sun comes round you get that casted shade from the hedge. So the beds themselves are looking quite nice at this time of year. They were looking a little bit better probably a few weeks ago because the wallflowers were in full bloom. The wallflowers are just finishing now, but as you can see the pansies are still looking really good. They kind of had a peak flowering around about early April time, then they died down a bit. I think they were having a bit of a break, but they've really reinvigorated the last few days. It's currently the middle of May, and as you can see the pansies are really putting on a nice display at the moment with loads of nice flowers, so I'm quite happy with how this is looking. They are basically the winter and autumn and spring bedding interests. The other pansies and violas you can see dotted around, they're basically more the self-seeded ones. As you can see, a mixture of different colours, but I just planted loads of these ones originally. So they will probably go over soon. What tends to happen, depending on the climate, is pansies and violas, they just don't like the heat in the summer and they just kind of die out. Normally aphids come in and decimate them. I don't think these will last a lot longer, but if we have a cold summer, they'll probably keep flowering all summer long and they'll last right through to next winter. They can last 1 or 2 years if you have a cold climate, but in most climates they're really good for spring, and they're okay for winter if you've got a mild winter. They will survive quite hard frosts, but they just don't normally flower over the winter time. So these were giving me a little bit of interest throughout the winter, but it was really spring that they've come into their own. And I'm just going to leave them, and what I'm going to do is plant in between them with the summer flowers. So the idea is I've left a few spaces in between each one. Like some of them have self-seeded with ones that have been filled. But what I'm going to do is in all these spaces I'll be planting this up with marigolds. I've got French marigolds this year. I do normally prefer the African marigolds because they're much larger, but I'm just going to go with the French ones because they're the only ones that I had in the shop. So they're going between. What will happen, these will probably start dying back come June, July, when the weather gets even warmer, and then the summer bedding will come through and take over the show. What I like to do is I like to make sure there's a bit of overlap between the summer and the spring bedding, because if I was to plant the summer bedding out when these are finished, the problem is they'd be tiny plants, there wouldn't be much to see for a few weeks until they grow on, and it just gives them a bit of time to grow and establish before this other display is finished, so I get constant flowers throughout the year. And I do something similar in autumn. It's around about early September, so quite early into the autumn season I plant out the autumn bedding, even though the summer bedding will continue to give me a display for another month or two. I do that so that the autumn bedding can get a good chance to get established in the warmer weather. If I plant out my autumn bedding in late autumn, it's so cold here in Scotland and dark, they really don't do well, and they just sit there, and then by winter time they're not much bigger, so you haven't got that nice display of winter time. So I tend to plant them a little bit earlier, and as I say, in between the summer bedding, and they'll grow up, and then as the summer bedding gets killed by the frost, the winter bedding gets a bit more space. So that's my plans for the bedding this year. Basically intersperse it with a mixture of bush lobelia and also French marigolds to give a bit of colour. So these are the plants I'm going for. I would have bought a bit more, but I only had a small basket, so I couldn't pick them all up, so I might go back and get some more if this isn't enough, but I've got 20 of each basically. So these are the French marigold plants, really quite small, but it's still early in the year, so they'll have plenty of time to grow. And I've got very rich soil, so they should do well. And then I've got the bush lobelia, and if you're going for lobelia in beds, always really should go for the bush one because they don't get too leggy and fall over. But if you want trailing lobelia, then put them in baskets and pots, but I tend to go for bush ones in the beds. So they'll be dotted in with the marigolds. They'll be going in between all of these. If there's a few left over from that, I'll put them on the side, because what I did last year is I also dotted in my pansies along the side of the beds and then alternated them with any kale plants that I did have, but they were rather small and they did get eaten by caterpillars, so you can see they're not very big plants there, so I might even take some of them out if I need to make space for the summer bedding, but they'll basically be going in there, so they should be looking quite good later in the summer when they establish. And then I've got all those tuberous begonias as well. If they don't all fit in the pots that I've got for the front garden, I'll probably put a few of the tuberous begonias in any of the spaces I've got left in the beds. And I'm also putting some specimen summer plants, and they are dahlia plants. So I've got a massive tuber. This tuber is probably almost too heavy to carry now. I had this dry stored over winter. This is my largest dahlia plant. So this is coming up now. I might thin out some of the stems because it's such a large established plant. It tends to grow too many stems and doesn't flower too well. So I'll thin out some of these stems. So I've only got 3 or 4, and they'll produce much better flowers that way. And I've also interspersed it with some Café au lait dahlias, which are the ones with the really giant heads. So there's one here which is looking a bit sorry for itself because it did get an aphid attack, but it seems to be clearing up and doing a bit better now. I planted it really close to the wallflowers because the wallflowers will be cut back hard soon and they'll be quite small plants for most of the summer. The same on this side here. You can see another dahlia there, and then I've got a third one down here somewhere. Still not looking great, but I'm hoping they'll pick up now they're in the soil, and now that they're outside. You can see nearly all the aphids have gone, but when they're in my conservatory there was no beneficial insects or wild animals to eat the aphids, so they're really suffering. So they should take off soon, especially when I cut back the wallflowers to a much smaller plant and they get more space. So that's all the bedding plants anyway, but I'd like to give you a show of some of the more permanent planting I have in this bed. So what we've got here is we've got the Cordyline. This has been growing well. I actually did a video about Cordyline care, and this is the one I mentioned, and I thought I'd give you a few updates throughout the years to show you how fast it's growing. So I planted this just over a year ago, and you can already see the size it's grown. I'll show you some photos of how it looked like last year, and you'll see how fast it's grown. They are quick growing plants if you've got the good growing conditions for them. I've made sure my beds are really rich, so I put loads of compost, lots of manure in, so this should grow really fast, and it's a nice south facing location, so that will do well. We've also got my Ensete ventricosum banana. I had 2 of these last year, one in each of the barrels. They grew absolutely massive. I dry stored them, and I planted this one in the bed this year. Now you notice it's not in the center. The reason for that is because it's going to grow so large it'll probably cover a lot of the path, and I want to be able to still walk into the doorway of my house, so I planted it to the side, but I reckon this is going to be absolutely huge this year. It's going to get its roots down and get all the space it needs. Even though that half a barrel is 150 litres, that was still not enough root space for the size of this plant. They grew so big last year, so I'm expecting really good things from this. It is looking a bit tatty because it's gone through some colder weather, and it had all its leaves and roots cut off for the dry storing, but it's now getting its roots re-established. This should really take off soon, and I'll give it a lot of high nitrogen feed to really spur it on, and I'm expecting this to become an absolute monster this year. And some other tropical plants I've put in here, just because I didn't have space in the back, are a few more castor oil plants. So I've got one at each end of the bed. So there's one there, there's one behind the Cordyline, which I know is a bit of a squishy place to put it because they're all going to be fighting for space here, so that's probably not an ideal location. And I've also got one at the other end as well, just underneath the Laburnums, and I had 2 there last year, but the Laburnums weren't there, and they were just to give a bit of extra height, so hopefully they won't be competing too much with the Laburnum trees. And these Laburnums, I'm quite happy with them. I planted them as bare root last autumn. They survived the whole winter, despite some of the worst storms in 20-30 years. And you can see now they're just starting to flower. Not many of the flowers are open yet, unfortunately, to show you, but they will be covered in nice flowers soon. This is the vossii variety, so this is a hybrid variety, so it grows a bit more vigorously than the normal ones. The flowers are bigger as well, and the flowers are sterile, so it doesn't set seed, which means a lot more of the energy goes into growth and into flowering next year. So these look fantastic in a few years' time, and my eventual aim is to grow an archway right over the top of my property here, over the gateway, and so it should look really nice with flowers hanging down over the walkway, over the entrance to my house. And then finally, the plants I'd like to talk about in this bed are the roses. So these are really rose beds. There's 6 roses in the beds in total. It's all of varieties that I've hand selected over the years are the ones that I know that are some of the best scented varieties, the ones that flower throughout the whole summer and are also really quite disease resistant. So this one here is Fragrant Cloud. This one is probably slightly less disease resistant than the rest, but that's a really nice, I think that one's a reddish colour. That's a really nice one. We've also got one here. This is Dutch Gold. This is a nice kind of a yellowy colour, and it does vary as it ages. It kind of fades to a lighter yellow. This again isn't super disease resistant compared with some of the others, but it does do really well, and it is quite disease resistant. Then we've got 2 Deep Secret roses, which are probably my favourite, or maybe second favourite, tied with my favourite to be honest. And these are really nice ones. These are really strong, vigorous roses, so probably the tallest out of the varieties I have. And I just love the colour. When they first come through, the buds are almost black, really, really dark red. And then you get this super deep red rose with amazing fragrance. And then eventually as it opens, it goes to a slightly brighter red, but it's still quite a deep, rich red. So it's a really, really nice rose, and the scent is one of the strongest and nicest I know of any roses, so I'm looking forward to these flowering again soon. As you can see, they're starting to bud up. This one here particularly has already got a large bud. You can see a little bit of that black coming through there as it's starting to develop, but it's just one of my favourite roses, that one definitely. And then this is then tied with that, I don't know if this is my favourite or my second favourite, is the Alpha Bell Rose. This one's a Floribunda rose, the other one's a hybrid tease. So this one is a little bit smaller, but it flowers a bit more prolifically, and you can see here it has multiple flowers in each shoot, whereas the hybrid teas, they tend to just have one flower. And this is unusual for a Floribunda because it's really nicely scented. So it's got the advantages of a Floribunda rose in that it flowers really well throughout the whole summer with multiple flowers in each stem, but at the same time it's got a really nice scent, a bit similar to the hybrid tea roses, and it's amazing disease resistance. Although all the rose varieties I picked are quite good for being resistant to diseases, this one is particularly resistant, almost never gets black spot. It does get a bit of black spot every now and again, but it almost never does. It's a really nice rose. It also has this really nice glossy looking foliage, so it's not just the newer leaves. Unfortunately there's not many older leaves to show you because it is late spring, but you can see even on the older leaves here, it retains that lovely glossy foliage, and it keeps that glossy foliage for most of the summer without any disease problems. Grows really strongly, loads of flowers, and it also stays quite compact. It doesn't get particularly large, and it's a nice rose as well because of how much the flowers change throughout the season. So when they first start, they're actually the rose bud, as you can see, this one here is actually yellow and red. There's quite a surprising amount of red on the bud as it comes up. Then what happens is you get this really deep, rich yellow golden colour, which then fades as it opens up fully. As it opens up fully, what you get is a really bright yellow, and then when the rose flower is just about to finish, it goes paler and paler, and eventually it's almost a white rose. So I like this one because the rose changes colour so much, it looks different for every rose on the plant. So it gives you a lot of interest that way, and it's so disease resistant, it flowers so well, but also it's got that amazing scent. So the Alphabet Rose probably is my favourite, closely followed by the Deep Secret Rose. Deep Secret Rose, I prefer the scent and I prefer the flowers on them, but it doesn't flower quite as strongly and it's a little bit more disease susceptible. So the only other plants really to mention on this bed at the moment are the Crocuses. You can see they're just going over. I purposely went for Crocuses because they give me a really nice display in springtime, but then the foliage dies down just as all your summer bedding plants are coming through, so they're not causing a lot of mess like you have with tulips and daffodils where you have a lot of foliage over the summer. So at the moment I've got them underplanted on all my rose plants apart from this one because that rose was a recent addition because the original one almost died. So what I'm going to do is eventually, as my budget increases over the years, I'm going to just add more and more crocuses and maybe some other early spring flowering plants, and so in springtime we'll have a nice carpet of flowers, and as the spring bulbs die back and their leaves die back, I'll then replace it with the summer bedding. So that's about it for the tour. What I'm going to do now is quickly go ahead, plant up all my summer bedding, show you what it looks like after it's planted, and then I'll see you guys in another video in a few weeks time when it's all in full flower in midsummer. That's it now all planted up. As you can see, there's probably not a huge difference because the plants are really small. You won't really notice them until they grow a bit taller. You can see here in between the violas, they are really small, quite small plants. So this will look quite different in a few months' time. I'll show you a quick clip now of what it looked like when I first put in the violas. And as you'll see, they were so small when they were put in, you really couldn't see them much in the bed, but then they really grew up and filled up, and that's how they got to such a nice large size now. So the same will happen with these bedding plants, and also with the plants in the whiskey barrel planters here. As you can see, this one looks particularly sparse because I've cut the other plants back really hard, and the Ensete is very small. And it's the same with this one here, but not as dramatic because we've got the slightly larger Ensete there, so there is a bit more interest left. So what I'll do now is I'll water in all the bedding plants, make sure they got plenty of water so they don't dry out in this windy weather. We do have some wetter weather coming up, so I won't need to water too much, but I'm going to water them in with a general feed and give them that boost. I'm also going to scatter grow more over the whole bed to make sure the bed is well fed. I did put chicken manure on the bed for a slow release feed at the end of winter, and that's what's given the plants such a good boost and growth now, and that's why we've got such a good flowering display. But I want to put in some more feed because most of that chicken manure will be used up by now. Certainly the nitrogen part of it will be, and I want there to be a decent amount of nitrogen because I want some really fast, rapid growth. And I'm not looking for flowers at the moment because I've got loads of flowers from the spring flowering pansies still. I just want the bedding plants to get on loads of growth, lots of leaves. Once they've sized up, then what I'll do is I'll switch to a high potassium feed such as a tomato feed, and that will encourage lots of flowering. I'll just liquid feed them about once a month over the summer with tomato feed, just to encourage maximum flowering. But for now it will just be a general balanced feed, watered into the individual plants and then grow more scattered on the whole bed. With the exception of the roses I'll be giving a little bit extra feed. I've got some specific rose feed, which is a granular feed, which I'll be sprinkling around the base of the roses. That's just got a little bit more magnesium and phosphorus and potassium than the other feeds, so it's just better tailored to roses to help them to grow well, be disease resistant, and also have more flowering. So that's all from this update. I'll see you guys in a few months' time when it's back in full flower, probably mid to end of summer, and it should hopefully be really full of summer flowers by then.